Get out of my hotel. Victoria Chambers screamed, her face twisted with rage as she grabbed Simone Carter's arm. I don't care what you think you reserved. People like you don't belong here. The words echoed to the elegant marble lobby of the Royal Meridian Hotel, drawing stares from the few guests still awake at 1:30 in the morning. Simone tried to pull her arm free from the night manager's grip, but Victoria's fingers only dug in harder, her manicured nails biting into skin. Let go of me, Simone said, her voice steady despite the shock coursing through her body. You're assaulting me. Assaulting you? Victoria's laugh was shrill and ugly. You're trespassing. You waltz in here dressed like some... She paused, her eyes raking over Simone's jeans and sneakers with undisguised contempt. Like you can't even afford to step foot in a place like this, demanding a room we both know you didn't book, and now you want to play victim? This couldn't be happening. 10 minutes ago, Simone had simply walked through the doors of her own hotel, exhausted from her 14-hour flight from Singapore, dressed casually because it was the middle of the night, pulling a small carry-on behind her. She'd come here unannounced, wanting to see how the Royal Meridian operated when no one knew the owner was watching. The property had been hemorrhaging money and guest satisfaction scores for months, and she wanted to understand why. Now she knew. For the past 3 months, the Royal Meridian, the flagship property in her portfolio of 17 hotels, had been hemorrhaging money. Guest satisfaction scores had plummeted from a consistent 4.8 stars to barely 3.2. Negative reviews flooded their website daily, complaining about everything from rude staff to discriminatory treatment. The general manager, Robert Henshaw, had assured her repeatedly that these were isolated incidents, that he had everything under control. But Simone had built a $400 million hotel empire by trusting words over evidence. She'd built it by showing up, by seeing things with her own eyes, by understanding every level of her business from the ground up. That's why she was here now, unannounced, dressed in jeans and a simple black sweater, with her hair pulled back in a ponytail and no makeup on. She wanted to see how her hotel operated when no one knew the owner was watching. The doorman barely glanced at her as she walked through the entrance, pulling her small carry-on behind her. He was busy on his phone, laughing at something on the screen. Strike one, she thought. At the Royal Meridian, doormen were supposed to greet every guest with warmth and attention, offering assistance with luggage. The lobby was stunning as always. Italian marble floors, crystal chandeliers, fresh orchids on every surface. She'd spent $3 million renovating this space 2 years ago, and it still took her breath away. But something was off. The overnight concierge desk was empty. 2 guests stood near the elevator, looking confused and frustrated, checking their watches. Simone approached the front desk, where a young clerk named Danny, according to his name tag, was leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone. He didn't look up as she approached. "Excuse me," Simone said politely. Danny held up one finger without looking at her, finishing whatever he was reading on his screen. 30 seconds passed, then another 30. "Excuse me," Simone repeated, her voice firmer now. "Yeah, 1 second," Danny said, still not looking up. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he glanced at her, his eyes sweeping over her casual clothes and worn sneakers with barely concealed dismissal. "Can I help you? I'd like to check in, please. I have a reservation." "Name?" he asked, his tone suggesting he was doing her a favor. "Carter. Simone Carter." He typed lazily on the keyboard, his long nails clicking against the keys. "Don't see anything under Carter. That's impossible. The reservation was made this afternoon. Can you check again?" He sighed dramatically, as if she'd asked him to solve a complex mathematical equation. "I'm checking. There's nothing here. Are you sure you have the right hotel?" Simone felt her jaw tighten. She knew exactly how to handle this situation. She'd trained thousands of hospitality workers over the years, but she wanted to see how far this would go. "I'm positive. This is the Royal Meridian Hotel, correct?" "Obviously," Danny said, rolling his eyes. "Look, maybe whoever booked it for you messed up. We're fully booked tonight anyway. There's a Motel 6 about 3 miles down." "I'd like to speak to your manager," Simone interrupted, her voice calm but commanding. "She's busy." Danny went back to his phone. "I'll wait." Suit yourself. He shrugged and walked away from the desk, disappearing through a door marked staff only. Simone stood there, her exhaustion now mixed with a growing anger. This wasn't just poor service. This was a systematic breakdown of everything she'd built. She pulled out her phone and opened the hotel's internal booking system, finding her reservation exactly where it should be. Someone had deliberately ignored it or, worse, deleted it. 10 minutes passed. 15. 20. Other guests came and went, receiving equally indifferent service from Danny when he eventually returned. A middle-aged white couple was checked in efficiently, given a room upgrade without asking, and directed to the elevator with a smile. An elderly Asian man was told brusquely that his room wasn't ready, and he'd have to wait, despite it being nearly 1 a.m. A young black family was informed that their reservation had been lost, and they'd have to go elsewhere. Simone watched it all, her mind cataloging every violation of the standards she'd established, every moment of discrimination, every failed interaction. She was building a case, and it was damning. Finally, a woman emerged from the back office. She was in her mid-40s, with severely pulled-back blonde hair and a tailored suit that looked expensive but was a bit too tight. Her name tag read Victoria Chambers, Night Manager. She approached the desk with an air of authority that immediately set Simone's teeth on edge, not because she exuded competence, but because she radiated a kind of entitled superiority that had no place in hospitality. "I understand there's a problem," Victoria said, looking Simone up and down with unconcealed disdain. Her eyes lingered on Simone's casual clothes, her sneakers, her lack of jewelry. "Yes, I have a reservation that your clerk claims doesn't exist, even though I can see it right here in the system." Simone held up her phone. Victoria didn't even glance at the screen. "If it's not in our system, then you don't have a reservation. I'm not sure what you expect me to do about that. I expect you to check your system properly and provide me with the room I booked. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to lower your voice. You're disturbing other guests." Simone hadn't raised her voice at all. She was speaking in the same measured, professional tone she always used. "I'm not raising my voice. I'm simply asking for the service I'm paying for." "Look," Victoria said, crossing her arms. "I don't know what kind of scam you're trying to pull here, but we're a 5-star establishment. We don't just let anyone," she paused meaningfully, her eyes sweeping over Simone again, "walking off the street and demand a room. If you can't produce a valid confirmation number and a credit card that matches our records, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "I have both," Simone said, her voice now carrying an edge of steel. "What I don't have is patience for incompetence and discrimination." Victoria's face flushed red. "Discrimination? How dare you? I treat everyone the same. But I don't appreciate attitude, especially from someone who walks in here dressed like—" She gestured vaguely at Simone's outfit. "Like you can't even afford to be here." "Interesting assumption," Simone said quietly. "It's not an assumption. It's an observation. And frankly, I think you're trying to cause trouble. Maybe hoping we'll give you a free room just to shut you up." Victoria's voice had risen now, drawing the attention of the few guests in the lobby. "Well, that's not going to happen. Not on my watch." "So your position is that I don't belong here?" Simone asked, her voice calm despite the fury building inside her. "My position is that this hotel has standards, and those standards include not tolerating people who come in here with some kind of agenda, try and shake us down. I've seen your type before." "My type?" "Yes, your type. People who throw around accusations of discrimination at the slightest inconvenience, hoping to get something for free. Well, I'm not falling for it." Victoria pulled out her phone. "In fact, I'm calling security. You need to leave. Now. I'm not going anywhere until I get the room I reserved." Victoria's face twisted into an ugly sneer. "Listen to me very carefully. You are not getting a room here. Not tonight, not ever. This is a respectable establishment, and I will not have people like you disrupting our operations and harassing our staff." "People like me," Simone repeated, her voice dangerously quiet now. "I don't know what you're trying to prove, but you need to take your attitude and get out of my hotel before I have you arrested for trespassing." The words hung in the air between them. "Your attitude? My hotel. The presumption, the dismissiveness, the barely veiled racism. It was all there, as clear as the crystal chandeliers overhead. Simone took a deep breath. She could end this now. She could tell Victoria exactly who she was. Watch the color drain from her face. Watch her scramble to apologize. But she needed to see how far this would go. She needed to understand the full extent of the rot that had infected her flagship property. "I'd like to speak to the general manager," Simone said. Victoria laughed, actually laughed. "Robert Henshaw? You think you're important enough to wake up the general manager at 1 a.m? Lady, you're delusional. Now, I'm done being patient with you. Either you leave voluntarily or security will escort you out. Your choice." 2 security guards had appeared, summoned by Danny. They were both large men in dark suits, looking uncomfortable with the situation, but ready to follow orders. "Ma'am," one of them said, his voice at least holding some courtesy, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." Simone looked at him, then at Victoria's triumphant expression, then at Danny smirking behind the desk. She thought about the young black family who'd been turned away earlier, about the elderly Asian man still sitting in the lobby waiting for his room, about all the guests who'd suffered similar treatment over the past 3 months. "No," Simone said simply. "No." Victoria's voice rose to a near shriek. "You're refusing to leave? That's trespassing. Mark, call the police. Have her arrested." The security guard, Mark, apparently, looked even more uncomfortable now. "Ma'am, please. I don't want to have to physically remove you, but if you don't leave, I'll have no choice." "I'm not leaving until I speak to Robert Henshaw," Simone said. "I have that right as a guest, or as someone attempting to be a guest, of this establishment." "You have no rights here," Victoria shouted. "This is private property. You are trespassing, and if you don't leave right now..." What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion, though it was over in seconds. Victoria, her face purple with rage, stepped around the desk. She grabbed Simone's arm, hard enough to leave marks, and tried to physically drag her toward the door. Simone, shocked by the physical assault, instinctively pulled back. Her carry-on bag fell over, spilling some of its contents onto the marble floor. "Get out!" Victoria screamed, her composure completely shattered. "Get your..." And here she used language so explicitly racist that even Danny looked shocked. The words echoed through the lobby, impossible to unhear, impossible to misunderstand. And then Victoria's hand came up and struck Simone across the face. The slap rang out like a gunshot in the elegant lobby. For a moment, everything stopped. The few guests who'd been trying to ignore the commotion froze. The security guard stood paralyzed. Danny's jaw dropped. Even Victoria seemed shocked by her own action, her hand still raised, her chest heaving. Simone stood very still, her cheek burning where Victoria had struck her. In her 15 years of owning hotels, in her 38 years of life, she had never been physically assaulted by an employee. She had faced discrimination before, subtle and not so subtle, but never anything like this. Never in one of her own properties. The rage that filled her in that moment was like nothing she'd ever experienced. It was cold and pure and absolutely controlled. She had been insulted, assaulted, and thrown out of her own hotel by someone who was supposed to be managing it in her name. Simone bent down slowly and began picking up her scattered belongings. A notebook, her laptop case, a folder with hotel financial reports, reports that showed the Royal Meridian's declining performance, reports with her name on the letterhead. Simone Carter, CEO, Carter Hospitality Group. She stood up, holding the folder where everyone could see it. Then she pulled out her phone and took a photograph of Victoria, who was still standing there in shock. "What are you doing?" Victoria demanded, her voice shaking now. "Delete that. You can't." "I can," Simone said quietly. "And I just did. I've also recorded the audio of this entire interaction." She held up her phone, where the voice memo app was still running. Every word, every insult, and of course the assault. Victoria's face went white. "You can't use that. That's illegal. Illinois is a 2-party consent state. For private conversations, yes," Simone said, "but this is a public place. The lobby of a hotel. and you're performing your duties as a manager. There's no expectation of privacy. Any lawyer could tell you that. She paused, letting that sink in. Of course, I won't need to rely solely on my recording. I'm sure your security cameras captured everything as well. Victoria's eyes darted to the camera's position throughout the lobby. The realization of what she'd done and what had been recorded was beginning to dawn on her. Now, Simone continued, her voice still eerily calm, let me introduce myself properly. My name is Simone Carter. I am the founder, owner, and CEO of Carter Hospitality Group. I own this hotel. I own the building we're standing in. I own every piece of furniture, every chandelier, every thread in that uniform you're wearing. And you, Victoria Chambers, just committed assault and battery against me in my own establishment. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria's face cycled through several colors, white, red, gray. Danny had actually stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of papers. The security guards looked like they wanted to disappear into the marble floor. That's not possible, Victoria whispered. Simone Carter is... The owner wouldn't just what? Show up unannounced? Test the service standards of her own hotel? Simone's voice was still quiet, but it cut through the silence like a blade. Why not? How else would I see what really happens here when no one thinks the owner is watching? Ms. Carter, Victoria's voice cracked. I didn't know. If I had known. If you had known, you would have treated me differently, Simone finished. But that young black family you turned away an hour ago, the elderly Asian gentleman still sitting over there waiting for his room, the dozens of other guests who've experienced similar treatment over the past months, they deserve the same respect you would have given me if you'd known who I was. Every guest who walks through those doors deserves to be treated with dignity and professionalism, regardless of what they're wearing or what they look like. I'm sorry, Victoria said, but there was a calculating look in her eyes now, a desperate attempt to salvage the situation. I was having a bad night. The stress of this job. You didn't mean to reveal your true character? Simone cut her off. You didn't mean to show exactly the kind of person you are when you think there are no consequences? Because that's what I saw tonight, Victoria. I saw who you really are. And more importantly, I saw what this hotel has become under Robert Henshaw's management. She turned to the security guards. Mark, is it? I'd like you to escort Ms. Chambers to the security office and ensure she doesn't leave until the police arrive. She's being charged with assault and battery. I'd also like copies of all security footage from tonight, starting from when I entered the building. Yes, ma'am, Mark said, looking relieved to finally have clear direction from someone actually in charge. You can't do this. Victoria protested as Mark gently but firmly took her arm. I'll sue. I'll go to the media. I'll tell them you set me up, that this was some kind of sting operation to trap me. By all means, Simone said, I'm sure the media will be very interested in the story of how a hotel manager physically assaulted and racially abused the owner of the property. Please, make as much noise about this as you'd like. As Mark led Victoria away, her protests echoing down the hallway, Simone turned to Danny, who looked like he might pass out. Where's Robert Henshaw? She asked. I think he's at home. Asleep. It's 1:30 in the morning. Call him. Tell him to be here in 30 minutes. If he's not here in 30 minutes, tell him not to bother coming in ever again. Yes, ma'am. Danny scrambled for the phone, his hands shaking. Simone walked over to where the elderly Asian man was still sitting, looking bewildered by everything that had transpired. Sir, she said, her voice warm now, all the coldness gone. I'm Simone Carter. I own this hotel, and I want to apologize for how you've been treated tonight. We're going to get you into your room immediately, and your entire stay will be complimentary. Additionally, I'd like to offer you a voucher for a week at any of my properties worldwide as a further apology. The man's eyes widened. That's very generous. Thank you. It's the least I can do. Danny, she turned to the clerk, who was frantically talking to someone on the phone. Get Mr. She looked at the man. Chun. William Chun. Get Mr. Chan checked into the executive suite. Now! Over the next 30 minutes, as she waited for Robert Henshaw to arrive, Simone took control of her hotel. She checked in the guests who'd been turned away, comped rooms for those who'd been mistreated, and personally apologized to everyone in the lobby. She called her head of security to have him review all footage from the past month. She called her legal team to brief them on the situation. She called her head of HR to prepare termination documents. And she thought about what came next. Chapter 2, The General Manager. Robert Henshaw arrived 26 minutes later, still buttoning his shirt as he rushed through the lobby doors. He was a man in his late 50s, with silver hair that he was clearly proud of, an expensive watch, and the kind of smooth confidence that came from years of getting away with things. "Simone," he said, using her first name as if they were old friends, though they'd only met a handful of times. "What's all this about?" Danny called in a panic, said something about Victoria and police. He stopped mid-sentence as he took in the scene. Simone standing behind the front desk, going through files on the computer. 2 uniformed police officers talking to Mark by the security office. Danny hovering nervously in the corner. "Robert," Simone said, not looking up from the screen. "Thank you for coming in. What's going on?" He approached the desk, his smile faltering. "Is everything all right?" "No, Robert. Everything is very much not all right." She finally looked at him, and whatever he saw in her eyes made him take a step back. "Your night manager just physically assaulted me in the lobby of this hotel." "What? That's... There must be some misunderstanding. Victoria is one of my best managers. She would never what? Discriminate against guests based on their appearance? Use racial slurs? Strike someone? Because she did all 3, Robert, and it's all on camera." Simone gestured to the security office, where one of the officers was reviewing footage with Mark. Robert's face went pale. "I'm sure if you just let me talk to her, we can sort this out. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, maybe..." There was no misunderstanding. I checked into my own hotel unannounced. Victoria didn't recognize me. She saw a black woman in casual clothes and decided I didn't belong here. She insulted me, tried to have me arrested for trespassing, physically grabbed me, and then slapped me across the face. All because she decided I wasn't the right kind of person for the Royal Meridian. "Jesus," Robert breathed, running a hand through his silver hair. "Simone, I am so sorry. This is inexcusable. I'll fire her immediately. I'll make a statement. We'll do whatever damage control is necessary." "Damage control," Simone repeated, and there was something dangerous in her voice. "That's your first thought? Not about the systemic failures that allowed this to happen, not about the culture that's been festering in this hotel, but about damage control?" "I just meant..." "I know what you meant. You're worried about the reputation of the hotel, the reviews, the money. But here's what you should be worried about, Robert. Why did this happen? How did someone like Victoria Chambers become a manager at my hotel? How long has she been treating guests this way? And why didn't you know about it?" Robert opened his mouth, then closed it again. He had no good answer. "Let me tell you what I've discovered in the past hour," Simone continued, pulling up screens on the computer. "In the last 3 months, we've had 47 formal complaints about discriminatory treatment at this property. 47, Robert. Guests being told there are no rooms available even though the hotel isn't full. Guests being charged incorrectly. Guests being given inferior rooms despite having reservations for better ones. And do you know what all 47 of those guests had in common?" Robert was silent. They were all people of color. Black, Asian, Latino, Middle Eastern. Every single one. Simone's voice was shaking now, not with fear but with fury. "And these are just the formal complaints. I've spent the last 30 minutes reading online reviews. There are dozens more complaints from people who didn't bother with the formal process. They just left 1-star reviews and vowed never to come back. I wasn't aware of the extent. You weren't aware because you didn't want to be aware. I've sent you reports, Robert. I've sent you the satisfaction scores. I've asked you specifically about the decline in ratings. And every time, you told me everything was under control. You told me these were isolated incidents. You told me you were handling it. I thought I was. You weren't. Simone closed the laptop with more force than necessary. You were protecting your staff instead of protecting my guests. You were making excuses instead of addressing problems. And now, as a result of your negligence, I was physically assaulted in my own hotel. Robert sank into one of the lobby chairs, his face gray. What do you want me to do? I want you to tell me the truth. How long have you known that Victoria Chambers was discriminating against guests? There were some concerns raised. About a year ago, but I talked to her and she assured me. A year ago? Simone's voice rose. You knew about this a year ago and you did nothing? I did do something. I talked to her. I made it clear that kind of behavior wouldn't be tolerated. And yet it continued. So clearly, your talk wasn't very effective, was it? Robert had no answer to that. Let me ask you something else, Simone said, leaning against the desk. Why did you hire Victoria Chambers in the first place? What made you think she was qualified to manage the overnight shift at a 5-star hotel? She had experience. She'd worked at several high-end properties in New York. Properties she'd been fired from. Simone interrupted. I just looked up her employment history. She was let go from the Waldorf for complaints about her treatment of guests. She was let go from the Plaza for the same reason. And somehow, despite this very clear pattern, you hired her. Why? Robert was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said quietly, she was recommended by a friend, someone I trusted, and she interviewed well. She said all the right things. A friend recommended her even though she'd been fired twice for discrimination? I didn't know about the discrimination. My friend just said she'd had some personality conflicts with management. Simone closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. So you hired someone based on a personal recommendation, without doing proper due diligence, and ignored multiple red flags because she said all the right things. Is that what you're telling me? When you put it that way, that's the only way to put it, Robert. You failed. As a manager, as a leader, and as a representative of my company, you failed. And now I have to deal with the consequences. One of the police officers approached them. Ms. Carter, we're ready to take your statement. Thank you, officer. Simone turned back to Robert. Wait here. We're not done. She spent the next 20 minutes giving her statement, providing the recording she'd made, and pressing charges against Victoria Chambers. The officer assured her that with the video evidence, the audio recording, and multiple witnesses, the case was straightforward. When she returned to the lobby, Robert was exactly where she'd left him, staring at his hands. The complaint reports were even more damning. Simone had known about the recent spike in discrimination complaints. Those were the ones that had prompted her surprise visit. But as she dug through the files, she found dozens more from the past 2 years that had been marked as resolved or unfounded by Robert without any real investigation. A black couple complained that they'd been charged twice for their room, and then told there was no record of a refund when they'd clearly been promised one. Robert's note, financial misunderstanding, offered $50 voucher as gesture of goodwill. An Asian businessman complained that he'd been asked to show his ID multiple times during his stay, even after checking in, while white guests were never questioned. Robert's note, security protocol, guest was oversensitive. A Latino family complained that they'd reserved a suite, but were given a standard room, told the suite was unavailable, only to see it listed as available online during their stay. Robert's note, system error, suite unavailable due to maintenance, offered room upgrade for future stay. Each dismissal, each excuse, each minimization of legitimate complaints revealed a manager who either couldn't see the pattern or didn't want to. And given what Simone had learned about Robert's hiring practices, she suspected it was the latter. But the personnel files and complaint reports weren't the only documents that troubled her. As she dug into the financial records, another disturbing pattern emerged. The hotel's revenue had been declining steadily over the past 18 months, but the executive salaries had not. In fact, Robert had given himself 2 raises during that period, bringing his salary to $180,000 per year, well above the industry standard for a property this size. He'd also given raises to all his managers, including Victoria Chambers, who'd been earning $75,000 per year. Meanwhile, the housekeeping staff hadn't seen a raise in 3 years, and their benefits had actually been cut to reduce operational costs. There were other questionable expenses, too. Robert had billed over $30,000 in client entertainment. In the past year, dinners at expensive restaurants, bottles of wine, golf outings. Some of these might have been legitimate business expenses, but many seemed suspicious. Did he really need to take a prospective client to a $500 dinner 3 times in 1 week? The more Simone read, the angrier she became. This wasn't just about Victoria Chambers' assault and racism, though that was certainly the catalyst. This was about a complete failure of leadership, a systematic corruption of the values she built her company on, and a betrayal of the trust she'd placed in someone she thought was competent. By the time dawn broke over Chicago, Simone had filled a legal pad with notes and flagged dozens of files for further review. She had more than enough evidence to justify wholesale changes to the staff. The question now was how to implement those changes without causing operational chaos. At 6 a.m., she called Marcus Thompson, her chief operating officer. Marcus had been with her since the beginning, when she'd opened her first small boutique hotel in Atlanta 13 years ago. He was brilliant, loyal, and, most importantly right now, he understood crisis management. "Simone!" Marcus's voice was groggy with sleep. "What's wrong?" "Everything," she said, and proceeded to tell him what had happened. Marcus was silent for a long moment after she finished. Then he said, in a voice tight with controlled anger, "I'm going to kill Robert Henshaw." "Get in line," Simone said dryly. "But first, I need you here. Can you catch a flight this morning?" "I'll be on the first plane out. ETA around 11. You need me to bring anyone else?" "Bring Jennifer from HR and David from legal. We're going to need both. And Marcus, bring the emergency management protocols we developed last year. The ones for hostile takeovers and natural disasters. Those are the ones. This isn't quite the same, but the principles apply. We need to transition to new management without disrupting operations, and we need to do it fast." "I'm on it." "Simone." "Yeah. Are you okay? I mean, she actually hit you." Simone touched her cheek, which was still tender. In the bathroom mirror earlier, she'd seen the